Good day, everyone. My name is Onomeriwa. Today I'll be presenting on building real cybersecurity credibility. I'll be talking about frameworks, documentations, and practical risk thinking. Um, I know I've spent a bit of your time. I was having issues with my network, so I had to sort that out. So, with no further ado, I am the founder of CentriSec, and what we do at CentriSec is we help companies align, comply with compliance and regulatory bodies. Cybersecurity, we help out with cybersecurity solutions. We help out with everything that has to do with cybersecurity here in Nigeria. And why we started this company is because we saw a need for it here in Africa. Cybersecurity has to be taken seriously. With the growing rate of threat actors in the country, you know, we saw a need for this. Yeah, with no further ado, the the expertise I started, my expertise is in compliance and risk vulnerability and governance. My operational background, I started with threat monitoring and VAPT, which is vulnerability assessment and pen testing. Um, our goal here is to help businesses align with security and security compliance, basically. We're helping business leaders make defensible and risk-aware decisions. So the road session and the road session of this whole presentation is just going to take, I'm not sure it's going to take up to 60 minutes, but I just made sure if I'm going to be answering questions from anyone, I'll be able to add time to that. So from 0 to 10 minutes, we're going to start with the introductions, which is redefining real credibility beyond industry certifications. Um, Second, from the 10 to 25 minutes, we're going to talk about moving past security chaos to organized program and structures. After that, we're going to move to, that's from 25 to 40 minutes. We're going to look at documentations, deep dive into evidence and repetitively and defensively and using security defensive. After that, we're going to look at the risk and QA and practical workplace execution and open dialogue. So we're going to start with redefining credibility, understanding trust, risk, and business confidence. Um, the core message is cybersecurity credibility is not just built by certifications alone, right? People think, oh, as much as I have the ISO certification, or I'm certified in this, I have this certification body. It doesn't build credibility like that, right? Credibility is more than just what you can say, is now what you can prove, right? Cybersecurity credibility is not just built by certifications alone. It is built by how well you can understand, document your work, use recognized frameworks, communicate clearly, and help businesses make better security decisions. Um, it is a myth, right? When people say, "Oh, so what I did here is I gave what is not and what it is, what the mirage or what people think this is and what the actual grounding is, right? The credibility versus the reality, right? That's the myth versus reality. Many professionals falsely believe credibility is achieved through collecting badges and certifications without context. Raining, hi- Raining highly technical buzzwords like execute boards and all of those technical words people use. It doesn't build credibility. Knowing how to operate tools but ignoring operations doesn't build credibility, right? What really builds credibility is real trust from business leaders and regulators comes down to connecting technical security events to financial survival. Cybersecurity is built around securing assets, be it digital assets, fiscal assets, and all of these assets are always tied down to money, right? All these assets are tied down to funds all these assets are tied down to finance, right? While securing businesses from losing financial impact and also brand credibility. You know, if we look at the hacks that have gone on in the past few 10 years, right? We're going to know that these hacks haven't been, sorry, hold on, my stuff stopped sharing for a minute. Yeah, we're going to notice that these hacks aren't bare minimum things. They affect businesses way more than we think, you know, be it the financial loss that they are going to have, and also brand credibility. They will have customers under them, they will have vendors under them, you know, they wouldn't want to work with them anymore, you know, because they will try to close their doors from them firstly, knowing that they are an attack surface, you know. So these are things we need to look into. Connecting tactical security events to financial survival is very important. Translating raw software vulnerabilities into operational exposure. You know, some companies and financial companies, most especially, um, some of them just come out and they have licenses and they are operating, but they don't know the financial impact of them bringing out a platform, for instance, you know, and hasn't been properly checked, you know, even if it has gone through the proper QA, you know, it still needs to go through vulnerability and pen testing. You know, every platform you're going to show users is going to pass users data, you know, users are going to have be it card details saved on your platform. You know, you need to have all these platforms, you know, checked, you know. If someone is going to hack into your platform, for instance, do you have a framework to show that, okay, how do I have an incident response plan, for instance, you know, to know that, okay, if this incident is up, how do I handle this incident? You know, how do I go about it? You know, what is the plan? Is there a plan towards it? You know, that's why it's very important to have software vulnerability and operational exposure, you know, translating it into the business issues that it will have. Assisting management to confidently confidently prioritize repairs. You know, we as CISOs, we know sometimes it's not easy working with management, you know, and boards. Um, advi advising them on certain security tools. I know as much as businesses are trying to spend as much minimum money, you know, or try to tie down cash. Security is very important. You know, security is a core business tool. A business can't run without security. You know, no business can say they want to run today's day to day without having a form of security, be it physical security, be it digital security. You know, you can't start a business today and leave the door of your business open. You know, it's very important we make sure we prioritize security. You know, the framework mastery, using structures to eliminate random security. Um, so I'm going to be talking about frameworks. There are different frameworks to the goal, right? For every security architecture you are going to build, there's always a goal, you know, which is the CIA triad. Um, the CIA triad basically means confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And confidentiality means, so it's a framework that every or it's an analogy, right, that every security framework guides to, you know, confidentiality, which means how confidential is the data, you know, do you share this data with anybody, you know, does anybody know about, for instance, if I'm storing my password somewhere, does anybody know what my password is? Like, are there encryptions in place to make sure that my password isn't, you know, isn't seen somewhere, you know? That's what confidentiality means. Integrity means, has the data been changed? For instance, if I am going to store my password as ABC, for instance, right? If I try to log in with ABC and it doesn't work, and I know ABC was my password, is that an issue? Has the data been changed somewhere? Can we make sure that the data we're going to be handling to people have integrity? Availability also, lastly, means how available is the data to everyone? If I pay for a service today and in your privacy laws or in your law, you say the service will be available 24 hours, 7 days a day, 7 days a day, right? Um, if it's not available 24 hours, 7 days a day, it's a breach of contract. How available is your data to the people that need this data? So that is what the CIA triad is all about. And every framework abides by the CIA triad. Um, sorry, hold on, I'm just my screen. Okay. I'm going to be listing a couple of frameworks um, that we abide by here in Africa. I know I wouldn't be able to um, talk about every framework, because there are multiple frameworks that align with different geolocations. Is what we call data sovereignty, for instance. For every geolocation in the world, there are different laws that abide to this. Just the same way a lawyer in a certain country can't go and practice in another country, because there are different laws. But they all have the same goal. So I'm going to be starting with the ISO 27001. Um, the core the core focus and purpose of this is it establishes a solid information security management system. This is a global standard, right? I think this is the most used standard and most I know of that most people I think most people would agree with that. The ISO 7001 is an ISMS um standard. It's a framework that helps companies align with cyber and information security. It streamlines everything bit to bit, for you to understand how to govern your whole infrastructure. Um, the target audience is global enterprises and legal compliance environments. Um, this is a very big global standard, the ISO 27001, right? They redefined this recently. That was in 2002. The present version most companies use is 2002, right? Breaks it breaks the ISMS down into annexes, right? And these annexes are easy for CISOs and information security professionals, to be able to scale and align and know the risk, they have in their environment, in their infrastructure. Um, After that, we have the NIST CSF. NIST CSF is a cybersecurity framework that is most of the times in most companies they are not compulsory, you know, but they're advisable to, guide because it's quite broad. It's not as streamlined as the ISO 27001, but it works for every organization. It can work for every organization. And the NIST CSF was developed by the um, National Institute of Technology Standards and Technology, right? It was developed in the US, right? And not it's not as broadly known as the ISO 27001. Yes, and after that we have the CSI controls, right? This the CSI controls basically are controls that are prioritized, in IT systems, information security. Um, um, Prioritize checklists of highly practical technical safeguards. And these are safeguards that even go down to your hardware, It goes way beyond your software and your digital parts. It goes way beyond that. These controls are widely known. It is a highly rated standard, right? After that, we have the NDPR and the NDPA. This speaks to Nigeria basically, right? Normally you have the GDPR, which is for the European Union, for Europe, but the NDPR speaks to Nigeria because I am from Nigeria, and these are the frameworks I am really familiar with. Or will I say these are the frameworks CenturySec is usually familiar with, right? This NDPR is the Nigerian Statutory Customer Data Protection and Privacy Guidelines. They their target audience is mostly local organizations processing customer and personal data. That's here in Nigeria where I currently work. We also have standards here by the Central Bank of Nigeria. If you are a fintech, because here in Africa we have a lot of growing fintechs coming in, and we are, I wouldn't say we are topping the game of fintechs here. So yes, we have a lot of fintechs coming in, and it is it is important we have frameworks to guide these fintechs, or guide these um financial markets that always, that come up and help out the organizations. This is what we call the CBN expectations. Security governance and technical rules for financial actors. Like I said, is mostly fintechs and financial bodies CBN handles with, because CBN works with banks. They work with banks, fintechs, and payment gateway providers. Um, Operationalizing the controls, right? Um, when I mean operationalizing the controls, how do your day-to-day operations work with controls? You know, um, every every guideline, every policy that we are guided by, every framework we're guided by, always comes down to controls. How do we use these controls in our operation day to day? Um, we look at the asset knowledge. Do we actively track what physical systems, software packages, and cloud data repositories exist across the network? Do we do this? I know in some countries they do this quarterly, in some countries, some companies they have standards of weekly. You know, do we how often do we do VAPT on your services? How often do you red team? Do you have a red team coming in to red team your environment just the same way a threat actor or an attacker would work? We can't say, oh, um we don't do this because we've never had a security incident. You never know when this will come. Some companies have security incidents that happen even 0 day, you know, 0 day incidents that haven't happened ever before, coming in and happening day to day in this 2025, all because of AI. AI has taken over the markets now where people can automate their threats. Threat actors are getting smarter. AI is working with them. AI is getting threat actors smarter. They're working in smarter ways. So how do we actively track what physical systems, software packages, and cloud data repositories exist across the network? You know, we always have to do testing. It's very important we test our environment. We can't, for instance, if an auditor is coming in to ask you, um, um, do you do VAPT? Can you prove that you have tested your environment? Show us proof, show us reports. These things don't come with day-to-day mouth. They come with evidence. You have to show evidence that I have done this. I have VAPT reports for the last quarter. I have done VAPT reports for the last 3 years. Okay, for the last 2 years, can I see the last report you have? This credibility is not just built by certifications, like I said. You have to show reports. You have to be credible. You have to be held accountable. Because if anything goes wrong, there has to be a trail, be it legally or be it a cybersecurity investigator. There has to be a trail. They have to start somewhere. There has to be proof that these things have been done. Okay, if these things have been done, what went wrong? Is this a 0 day? Is this something that has happened before? You know, um, access strategy. How frequently are credentials set, audited, and how strictly enforcing robust multi-factor authentication? Hmm. Access strategy is very important. Like I said, you can't say, oh, we have only admin accounts in my organization, so we don't need to, audit who comes in and comes out. It's very important to do that. You know, Everyone needs to be held accountable in case anything goes wrong in the business. For instance, if someone says they they logged in at 7, and there's no proof to say, you can't go back to the logs, or there are no save log files to say, oh, he logged in at 4. You would have something to be able to defend. you know so it's very important we audit who comes in our systems every time. For every organization, they have different standards. Some organizations they audit quarterly, some organizations they audit weekly, some organizations they audit monthly. you know um After that, we have sorry, hold on. After that, we have threat and response. Um, if an endpoint is actively compromised, how do we document repeatable steps to isolate and recover systems? It's very important we document these things. You're not going to say you are an organization of integrity. If an incident happens in your organization and you don't document these things, or you don't expose, I wouldn't say expose, but they are platforms to report these things, to help other organizations know better, to help them prepare better, right? If an endpoint is actively compromised, how do we document that? Do we make sure that there are trails to show, oh, this thing happened, this event has happened before? It happened in 2002, and we have a document to show of how it happened and how we learned from it, and the controls we added to make sure that this doesn't happen again. All these documents have to show integrity. If an endpoint is actively compromised, can you prove that you have done what it takes? Have you closed that endpoint? Is it reachable? Are the systems air gapped? It's very important we make sure we go about this with a business perspective. you know so this structure I'm putting just beats guesswork. The ineffective question is, are we secure? This leads to emotional guessing, superficial reports, and dangerous assumptions. It gives zero strategy clarity to board or auditors. Um you go into an audit, or you go into a board meeting as a CISO, for instance, and you are questioned, are we secure? And the only thing you say is yes. How do you prove that you're secure? Mhm. The framework solution, this is where everything comes down to. This is where your ISO comes down to, your NIST comes down to, all these frameworks guide your organization to be able to prove to auditors that you are ready, you know. Sorry, I just want to know, can you guys hear me? If you can hear me, say hi. Sorry. You can hear me, right, Eric? Okay, thank you. So everyone can hear me, right? I just want to be sure. Okay, sorry about that. I just got a message that you guys couldn't hear me, so I decided to continue. Structure beats guesswork, right? Um, where I wanted to sorry about that. Um, yeah, like I said, this leads to um emotional guesswork. If you're not guided by frameworks. We have different frameworks we're guided by in different geopolitical locations. Like I said, here in Nigeria, we are guided by, for instance, cards. We're guided by the PCI DCS, PCI DSS, right? For card and payment systems, we're guided by that. These are frameworks to show that, oh, if an auditor comes, can you prove that what you are saying is right? You know, a framework allows you to establish a metric-driven strategy. Um, A framework allows you to establish a metric-driven strategy. You replace subjective opinions with organized, defensible status indicators. The word here is indicators, right? Um, for every risk, for every control, the indicators to them, you know, can we prove that these indicators are defensible? If a breach happens today, and you have no idea about it, can you prove that you have no idea about it? If you put all your controls in place today and a 0 day happens today, can you prove that all controls were in place? You know, even if they are not in place. So we understand what went wrong and where to go wrong, or where to go right, rather, right? Um I listed some frameworks up there that we'll be guided by. I don't know if later we'll go much into them. Documenting evidence part two. This is basically how we have to document everything. For everything that has gone on or will go on, needs to be documented. If you are going to start a project today, document when the project started. All the controls are going to be listed in the project. You know, um, if you are going to have a cybersecurity architecture for an organization, you know, can you document everything that is going to happen? If an incident happens today, is there documentation to show that this incident happened at this exact time? Or does your documentation match with your logs? All of these things matter. You know, we're going to look at access control. Weak approach. Only admins have access key. You can't just tell an auditor only admins have access key. Yeah. The defensible evidence should be we review approval signatures and privilege change logs. They need to see, okay, how often do you change logs? How often do you check your logs? How often do you check if two admins have if they are just two admin accounts? How often do you check that they're not three admin accounts? You need to be able to prove this. Incident and response. The weak approach is we patch problems quickly, you know. The defensible evidence is, and the defensible evidence, we have timelines, you know. What is the mean timeline for a certain incident? You know, how long do you take to remediate? You know, what is the mean point? How 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 bad, or what's your risk appetite you are able to take before a business can go critical? You know, the root cause of the report, lessons learned. These things are very important in incident and response. Um, Third party risk. Uh, we only work with popular vendors. For instance, you are working with a third party, right? And the vendor or the auditors ask you, how do you evaluate your vendors? You know, and your response is, we only work with popular vendors. That's not defensible. That's not feasible, right? Um, the best approach to take is, we do due diligence on our vendors, right? Security checklists, contracts, and compliance reviews. We audit our vendors. If our vendors have third parties they also work with, you know, we do diligence to ask if those third parties are getting service for their, or getting offerings for their service. You know, it's very important we have everything defensible with evidence for auditors. It's very important we have all those things defensible for auditors. Um, Auditors take take things with precision. You know, we all follow a standard, right? And if your company is compliant, you know, you should be able to prove that you are compliant. There should be documentation showing that, oh, I'm compliant. Am I doing phishing simulations? Am I doing risk assessments? Do I have an asset inventory? You know, all these things are important, that we show proof that these things are being done, right? Um, Defensible security, using documentation as proof of defensive work. This is a proof of security activities, right? This is an example of two companies that claim to be defensible in whatever audit they are presented to, right? Company A says, we regularly train our staff on modern digital safety and phishing traps. The reality is, of offers no verified registration list, right? Correlation documents or quiz analytics during unexpected annual audit. You know, you go to an auditor saying, we regularly train our staffs on modern digital safety and phishing traps, without showing evidence of um the curriculums, trainings, the documents, or any quiz analytics you've done for people that have failed, you know, the phishing traps. You know, all these things needs to be documented for audit purposes. You can't just tell an auditor, I do A, without showing proof, right? Company B, which is evidence focused, we run bi-monthly automated security campaigns with target remediation tracks, delivers explicit sign-off attendance sheets, quiz performance grades, and verified simulation tracking metrics. This is what an auditor wants to see. How often do you run it? You know, can I see the documentations? Can I see the curriculums? Can I see the list of people that attended the trainings? You know, can I see the list of people that the phishing simulations were sent to? Can I see the list of people that failed? You know, you need to be able to defend these things and prove that these things have been done. It's very important for auditors. You know, security is way past what you can say, it's what you can prove. Documenting evidence. The security area, evidence. I'm just going to show you the security area, the weak approach, and the defensible evidence, which is what is credible to auditors, right? Security awareness, for instance, we send cybersecurity reminders. You can't just tell people that you send cybersecurity reminders. You can't come into an audit saying we send cybersecurity reminders. The auditor would ask, can I see attendance records? Can I see course content? Can I see quiz scores? You know, so you will tell them, oh, I have attendance records, I have quiz content, I have quiz scores, I have a list of people that clicked the link, I have a list of people that didn't click the link and reported it, you know, just to be able to rank your organization, or to be able to understand the risk score of your organization, the human risk score of your organization. Do we run phishing simulations? If they ask you, do we run phishing simulations? You say our employees are careful. How do you prove your employees are careful? How are you certain that a trainee wouldn't click something today, or a trainee wouldn't, you know, be manipulated by human tactics? You know, it's very important we train our staffs. Um, Detailed click rates, report metrics, and trend plans. You need to give a detailed analysis of, oh, these are my click rates, these are my report metrics, and these are trend plans. Every auditor works with reports. If there are not reports for something, it's just, or documentation for something, they didn't happen. You know, if there are no documentations for your phishing simulations, it never happened. If you have VAPT assessment, you come into an audit and you're asked for your VAPT assessment, and you say we run scans every year. How often every year? Can I see documents for it? Can I see reports for it? Have they been learning findings? Have there been any remediations? We have to have a scope sign off, rated findings, remediation, and retest. It's very important. You know, every business is tied to financial gain. And if this gain is not made, it's financial loss. So we have practical risk thinking, shifting from technical issues to commercial realities. Um, for every risk, right, that has to be taken, for every risk in an organization, for every risk in a business, right? There's a threat, and sorry, hold on. For every risk that will be taken in an organization, there's a standard calculation for everything, right? Credible security professionals bypass subjective emotional opinions. Instead, they calculate using standard commercial risk structures. If you look at the simple formula that is on my screen, we have risk is equal to threat times vulnerability times impact. The risk you're about to take is equal to the threat, how vulnerable the attack surface is, and the impact it is going to be to the organization. The threat, the external or internal hazard that you have in your organization, be it the staff you have, every human is a threat, human error, right? Social engineering is a human error, right? Um, the vulnerability, the unpatched gap or procedural loophole, the vulnerabilities in your system, the vulnerabilities on your platforms, the vulnerabilities in your organization. The impact, the ultimate operational and legal or commercial damage cost. The damage cost always is most times financial. And those financial things come with legal action. By defending risk as an interactive system or of exposures, you make your mitigation sensible to finance officials and business directors alike, right? If you are if you want to explain risk to the board, for instance, they need to understand that there's a threat. There's always a threat, be it the threat actors coming outside or the workers working for the organization, right? There's always a threat. Um, there's always a vulnerability. Humans too have vulnerabilities, you know. There's always a vulnerability. That's why you have to train your staff, to make sure, oh, you close this vulnerability gap, right? And there's an impact you have to make, which is um in cybersecurity and business and risk, it's called your risk appetite, right? How much a business is ready to take, you know, how bad they are ready to go, you know, how much they are ready to lose aside, how much is their cybersecurity, um, how much is their cybersecurity fund they put out every year. It's very important. Visualizing risk context, right? Analyzing risk, real threats, real practical risk thinking involves asking targeted questions rather than staring a raw scan list. Um, I just gave a diagram here, visualizing the risk context, um, understanding what practical risk thinking is, right? Asking the right questions, right? Practical risk thinking involves asking the right questions rather than staring a raw scan list. So in this diagram, we can see analyzing real threats, asset value, what critical company databases are exposed. For instance, customer records. If you're working with a financial company, for instance, are your financial records exposed? You know, how how well do we hash passwords? You know, are we collecting card details? Do we hash them? Do we encrypt these details? It's very important these things are done. Um, um, what we have financial data, we have human data. Do we encrypt this? Intellectual property? What's the likelihood? How frequently they will move to the likelihood, right? How frequently has this port been attacked? For instance, most developers use default ports. For instance, you you want to see you want to host your website, and you host on a very common port. It's very important you have your unique ports, for every organization, which is internal to you guys. you know the threat activity, the exploit attempts, the historical patterns. Have these things happened before? That's why it's very important to keep documentation, right? To know where to start from if something goes wrong. You have to be able to show where this started from if anything goes wrong. Um, we also have mitigations. What safety layers do we already have, right? What safety controls do you already have? Do you have firewalls? Do you have multi-factor authentication? Do you have EDR and monitoring? Do you monitor your staff on what websites they go to? Do you monitor your staffs on what kind of contents they download? Do you have an allow list in your organization for the type of applications that come into your organization? How often do you patch? Do you patch immediately? Do you wait till a a standard patch is out before you patch? All these things are very important. We look at these are the risk. Are you ready to take this risk? You know, what is the appetite you are ready to take before the risk affects your organization to the point where you wouldn't be able to stand anymore? Um, let's look at analyzing real threats. Practical risk thinking involves asking targeted questions rather than staring raw scans and lists. Asset value. What critical company databases are exposed? Like I asked here. How frequently have these ports been attacked? And how frequently and what safety layers do we already have? This is the formula. And then if anyone wants to write it down, but the risk context is asset value plus likelihood minus mitigations. You know, focus on business impacts, realistic threats, and existing controls. We have the workplace scenarios, which is the VAPT. If an auditor comes in, if your company is audited, right, from whatever standard organization you're audited by, be it the ISO or whatever framework you're audited by, and they ask you, do you do VAPT? And you say the critical internet facing server has multiple severe unpatched CVs on it. We require a patch window. But this fails to explain the direct corporate business impact. It does not define the operational priorities or severity. It creates abstract technical panic without timelines, right? The credible risk approach should be an external server has vulnerabilities exposing our portal to data loss. We recommend patching within 7 days. It gives you a time window of how often you react if anything goes wrong. Right. This focuses the organization strategic threat level. It provides a clear, practical solution path for directors. It proposes a definite and actionable remediation timeframe. Right. It shows that you are proactive. The workspace scenarios, which is phishing. If you are questioned or you are asked by if do you run phishing simulations, the weak technical approach will be the phishing exercise failed. Too many staff members clicked on the link inside the test emails. You blame corporate and personals for trading gaps. You give no clean metrics for executive reviews. You provide zero plans to correct the core weakness. The credible risk approach will be our simulation saw 20% click rate and 4% report rate. We are conducting targeted finance training over 60 days. You see, this gives metrics. This metrics show that something is being done. You know, these metrics show that, oh, it is credible. You can tie it down to how many people clicked, how many people reported. Do you train? How often do you train? It presents precise, auditable baseline percentages. It maps structural weaknesses directly to high-risk teams. It launches a proactive, structured educational response. Now, if we look at vendors, the weak technical approach will be the software company is highly popular in our sector. Their tools should be safe enough for us. No one is safe enough, right? Even the biggest of companies have been hacked before, right? You can't come out saying you didn't do your due diligence on each third party vendor you're working with. You have to prove to an auditor that you are doing your due diligence. You have checked, you have done your findings to show that these people are credible enough to work with, right? Um, this relies on reputational bias instead of analysis. It fails to check data ownership and data security clauses. It skips crucial compliance assessment requirements, right? The credible the credible thing to say will be the software processes customer data. We must audit their encryption and compliance logs before onboarding, right? This shows that you are doing something. This shows that you are being proactive. This shows that you are going out there to look for who you are working with, to be sure that who you are working with is who they say they are. He identifies exact data security vulnerabilities immediately. It demands verifiable evidence of defensible capabilities. It ensures systematic alignment with statutory privacy laws. This is just an actionable roadmap to what a company should look at in 90 days if they actually want to set up a cybersecurity architecture, you know, and something that would work for them. From day 1 to 30, I will advise you align your company with frameworks. Um, the baseline foundation, select a core framework like NIST, CSF, ISO. You select a framework that works for your organization, you know, that your organization can tie every control down to. Um, this maps compliance gaps and records daily security evidence, right? From day 31 to 60, the business translates. You refrain from delivering raw technical statistics to executive, translate gaps to operational severity, right? You're going to leave all the technical controls from the 1 to 13, which you have implemented in the foundation. And now you're going to deliver these raw technical statistics to executives, right? You translate the gaps clearly without having to be too technical. From the 61 to 90, standard systems, right? Standardize the systems, which means you implement reusable core files, operational registers, formal tracking logs, and brief summary forms. It's very important, right? You have logs to be able to be tracked by. If you are going to be audited in any way, it's very important to show that, oh, I am I am documenting every step I take. you know if any incident happens, I have documentation to show that this incident happened, and the timestamp to show when it happened, and the trail to show how it happened. you know to always give an auditor a place to where to start. It gives them somewhere to start from. We're going to look at how to build credibility daily. You learn frameworks. Do not simply memorize governance concepts. Leverage standard architectures to prioritize controls and evaluate actual defense gaps, right? You have to understand these frameworks. You just don't memorize governance concepts. You have to understand how they work. You have to understand how these frameworks work with your controls, and how they speak to your business. Every business has unique controls they would need. The a fintech company wouldn't need the same controls a marketing company will need, for instance. Document everything. Build detailed security registers, sign off logs, audit trails, provide technical exercises where executed, evaluated, and improved. You want to make sure everything is documented for everything that is going to be coming in. Like I said, I've been speaking on documentation for over 20 minutes now. That's to tell you how important it is. Every company has to have a trail. You know, you have to communicate risk, learn to translate raw scanning report and vulnerabilities into clear financial risk concepts that company executive can safely act upon. You know, you have to leave as much it might be look technical. You have to come into the board prime light, right? Um, You have to translate every technical issue or every incident to the best possible way possible. Leave nothing out, because anything that can be left out could have been used to solve a problem, right? The key session takeaways are: I started with frameworks, standard structures provided for cybersecurity operators with governance, organizations, and clear direction. They prevent random security activities. I also went to documentations. Documentation provides indisputable, auditable proof of work. In the compliance landscape, undocumented operations are considered non-existent. If it's not documented, it's never existed, right? Translating raw technical flaws into strategic business exposure bridges the communication gap between security engineers and business executive, right? Can you be the one to communicate between the businesses, executives, and the technical gurus in the company? Can you be their middleman, right? The credibility and truth. Certifications may grant initial access, but sustainable professional trust is built through clear communication, auditable proof, and risk alignment. Um, I'm done for the day. Thank everyone for your time. Thanks for the engagement. Um, if anyone has any questions, they could troop in, please. Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay. So, thank everyone for joining. I hope I was able to pass the message across clearly, and everyone was able to understand where we are going to in this cybersecurity age. And yeah, while I am Onome again, I am the co-founder of CentriSec. CentriSec, we help businesses in Africa align with security. We help them protect their assets and we help them comply with regulatory standards. So thank everyone for their time, like I said again, and everyone have a nice day. Bye.